For those of you who have been with me for a while here on the channel, you guys already know that RPGs were a huge staple in my young gaming life. It all started back when my grandmother gifted me a copy of Dragon Warrior on the NES for Christmas, and from that point on, I was absolutely hooked on RPGs. Now, you guys have to remember that your boy Gotti is old. I'm getting old, and when I was a kid, Dungeons and Dragons was popping off. That's not just something you see on Stranger Things. Back then, Dungeons and Dragons was the thing to play. You weren't a nerd if you played Dungeons and Dragons. That's just what went down in my city. We had the graph paper, the dice, the freaking Dungeon Master. We had all that shit. The Dungeon Master was this older dude from the neighborhood, but he was the one that created like almost all the dungeons and all the treasures and the monsters that you would fight in these treasures. Almost like old school. Back then it was like game design, only you're doing it on paper and you're playing it out with dice. But anyway, Dungeons and Dragons made it all that much more immersive to dive into a good RPG. So Dragon Warrior started it for me, and then I believe the next one that I got into that I really liked was Final Fantasy 1 on the NES. Just an epic game on all levels. But then came the era of the Super Nintendo, which in my personal opinion is the greatest era for RPGs in the history of gaming. And it's the home to my favorite game of all time, Final Fantasy 3. I remember when this game dropped, I talked my mom into getting it for me. If I remember right, it was $80. It may have been $90. I let my homeboy Ryan borrow it before I ever beat it, and it took him months to get through it. And once I finally got my hands on it, I was completely blown away, and to this day, it remains my favorite game of all time. But back then, it seemed like as soon as you finished an RPG, there was another one for you to immediately dive into and immerse yourself in. Games like Final Fantasy 2, Breath of Fire 1 and 2, Lufia 1 and 2, Illusion of Gaia, Secret of Evermore, Secret of Mana, Chrono Trigger. The list literally goes on and on and on. With all that being said, I never played any of these Tales games, and Tales of Arise almost slipped under my radar. I just happened to catch Fighting Cowboy playing it. I watched his part 1 and part 2 of his playthrough, and I knew that I had to grab this game. Right now, I'm currently 11 hours into the game, and when I say that this game gives off those classic old school vibes, I mean it. From the soundtrack, to the voice acting, to the level design, you can feel the passion that went into making this game. The combat reminds me of Final Fantasy VII Remake, only better in my opinion. It's more fluid, I think. It looks better. I can't say it looks better. They're two completely different art styles. What I mean by that is when everything is being strung together with the combos and the spells and the abilities and all this, it looks better in motion, I should say. The mission structure, way better. My biggest gripe with Final Fantasy VII Remake was the mission structure. Some of those fetch quests that you had to do in order to level up were absolutely monotonous and completely boring to me. And that's not here with this game. The structure is absolutely perfect. The boss battles, intense as hell, with picture-perfect soundtrack playing as you're trying to string together combos to take out these bosses. Guys, from what I've played so far, Tales of Arise is the perfect blend of old school meets new school when it comes to RPGs. I can honestly say that I'm enjoying it even more than I enjoyed the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Long story short, do yourself a favor and pick this game up, especially if you come from the old school, when you're wanting that mix of old and new. This is where it's at, guys. Tales of Arise. This game is absolutely amazing, and I'm just now scratching the surface. I cannot wait to dive back in. I'm actually on a boss right now that is stomping my ass, and I had to walk away. I figured I'd type this up, shoot out a video to you guys, let you guys know that this is a game you do not want to miss, especially with all the stuff we've got coming up. Get this one, get through it, beat it, and that way you can move on to the next. But anyway, that's all I got for you guys. As always, chime off in the comment section. Gotti360. Keep it gaming.